Imagine being tested when you least expect it. A billionaire leaves his treasures out in the open, pretending to sleep just to see if a poor boy will take the bait. But what the child does next shocks him so deeply. It changes both of their lives forever. Stay with me, because this story will leave you speechless. Welcome to Brainfuel, a channel where real emotions, powerful lessons, and life-changing stories come alive. Here, every video is crafted to touch your heart, inspire your mind, and remind you the values that truly matter. If you believe in kindness, honesty, and the strength of humanity, then you're in the right place. Let's begin today's unforgettable story. Wealth has a strange way of shaping people. It can give comfort, power, and influence, but it can also create distance, suspicion, and pride. In the heart of the city, beyond tall iron gates and winding driveways, stood the mansion of a billionaire named Mr. William Thompson. To the outside world, he was a symbol of success, an untouchable man who had everything anyone could ever dream of. Luxury cars, priceless art, endless land, and enough money to last for generations. Yet behind those walls of marble and gold, he lived a life of mistrust. Mr. Thompson believed that most people only cared about his wealth. In his mind, loyalty and honesty were rare gems, almost impossible to find. Even those who worked for him, his drivers, chefs, and maids, he treated with polite distance but never true warmth. He paid them generously, yes, but he never believed they could be truly loyal if money wasn't involved. To him, everyone had a price. Among the many workers who served him was a black maid named Angela Carter. Angela was a humble woman in her early 30s, a widow who had been raising her son, Daniel, all on her own. She had been in Mr. Thompson's household for nearly 5 years. Unlike many employees who came and left quickly, Angela remained. She was quiet, hardworking, and respectful. She never once asked for favors or tried to cross boundaries. Her son, Daniel, was a boy of just 11 years old. He was bright-eyed, soft-spoken, and carried himself with a kind of maturity rare for his age. Angela often brought him along when she had long shifts, and the boy would sit quietly in the corner of the kitchen, doing his homework or reading borrowed books. Many in the mansion noticed his polite manners, and some of the staff adored him, but Mr. Thompson rarely paid attention. One rainy evening, however, something changed. The billionaire had been reading the financial news in his study when he noticed Daniel helping one of the chefs pick up groceries that had slipped from a bag. The boy worked carefully, making sure even the apples weren't bruised. He smiled politely, even though no one had asked him to help. Mr. Thompson watched quietly from the doorway. For a brief moment, he admired the boy's nature, but then the old doubts crept in. Kindness is easy when eyes are watching, he thought. What about when no one is looking? That thought haunted him for the rest of the night. He knew Angela was honest. She had proven that countless times. But the boy, he was still young. Would he resist temptation if given the chance? Or would he, like so many others, fall to greed when faced with riches lying within reach? The billionaire decided to find out. Later that night, after dinner, he called Angela and Daniel into the grand living room. The chandelier glowed warmly, reflecting off polished floors and golden decor. He told them they were welcome to stay in one of the guest rooms, since the rain outside was pouring too heavily. Angela was surprised at his offer. It wasn't common for him to extend such gestures, but she accepted gratefully, thanking him on behalf of herself and her son. What Angela didn't know was that Mr. Thompson had already set his plan in motion. As soon as they left the room, the billionaire carefully arranged his trap. On the large glass coffee table in front of the leather sofa, he placed things most people would find irresistible. Thick stacks of $100 bills, neatly tied with golden bands, his expensive diamond-studded wristwatch, and a rare fountain pen made of pure gold, a gift he had once received from a foreign dignitary. All of it lay openly, as though forgotten. Then he turned down the lights, stretched out on the sofa, and pretended to fall asleep. His breathing slowed, his eyes shut, but behind those lids, his mind was fully awake, alert, and waiting. Let's see what happens now, he told himself. If the boy truly has character, he'll leave everything untouched. But if not, well, I'll know the truth. Minutes passed. The mansion grew quiet, except for the soft patter of rain against the windows and the steady ticking of an antique clock in the hallway. The silence seemed endless. Mr. Thompson lay still, rehearsing in his head how he would respond if Daniel took anything. He imagined exposing the boy, confronting Angela, maybe even sending them both away. A part of him almost wished the boy would fail, so he could prove himself right about the world once again. But another part of him, a small voice he often ignored, hoped for something different. Perhaps, just perhaps, the boy would surprise him. His heart began to race as he finally heard the sound he had been waiting for. The soft creak of a door opening, followed by the gentle pad of small footsteps moving across the marble floor. He could picture it without looking. Daniel, curious, wandering into the grand room, seeing the treasure displayed so carelessly on the table. Every second stretched like an eternity. Mr. Thompson's grip on his own patience tightened. This is the moment, he thought. This is when I find out who this boy really is. And so, lying there in false sleep, surrounded by symbols of his wealth, the billionaire waited, ready to catch the boy in the act, yet unprepared for the lesson that would soon change his heart forever. The mansion was wrapped in silence. Outside, rain drummed steadily against the tall windows, blurring the glow of the garden lights. Inside, the air was heavy with stillness. The only sounds were the steady hum of the air conditioner and the deep, measured ticking of the antique grandfather clock standing proudly in the hallway. On the sofa in the living room, Mr. Thompson lay motionless, feigning sleep. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, but his mind was wide awake. He had set the stage for his little test, money, jewelry, and priceless treasures placed in plain sight. He wanted to see what the young boy, Daniel, would do when temptation whispered to him in the quiet of the night. Time stretched painfully. A few minutes felt like an hour. Mr. Thompson could feel his heartbeat in his ears as he lay waiting. He knew curiosity was a strong force, especially for a child. He had seen it before. Children might not understand the value of money completely, but shiny objects, glittering gold, and stacks of bills always drew their eyes like magnets. And then, just as he expected, he heard it, a soft creak, the sound of a door opening carefully, as though someone didn't awake the house. Then came the gentle shuffle of feet against the polished marble floor. The steps were light, almost hesitant, but they grew nearer. It was Daniel. The boy's small frame appeared in the wide doorway of the living room. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light. The glow of the chandelier above shimmered faintly on the floor, guiding his steps. Daniel looked around, his young face filled with quiet wonder. It wasn't his first time in the living room, but at night, with the rain outside and the silence pressing in, the place felt almost magical. The tall shelves lined with leather-bound books, the golden vases, the grand piano in the corner. All of it seemed larger and more mysterious than ever before. And then his gaze fell on the table. There, right in front of the sofa where Mr. Thompson pretended to sleep, lay the treasures. The boy stopped in his tracks. His eyes widened slightly. Stacks of money so crisp they almost gleamed under the light, a golden wristwatch that sparkled with embedded diamonds, and a pen so elegant it looked like it belonged in a museum. For a long moment, Daniel just stood there. He could feel his heartbeat quicken. He was only 11, and though his mother had always raised him with strict values, he was still a child. To a boy who had grown up watching his mother stretch every dollar, who had never owned anything extravagant, the sight was overwhelming. But even as temptation tugged at his thoughts, another voice echoed inside him, his mother's voice. He remembered the countless times she had told him, "Daniel, it doesn't matter how little we have. What matters is that it's earned honestly. If something is not yours, you never take it." Still, curiosity urged him forward. Slowly, quietly, Daniel walked closer to the table. His small footsteps echoed lightly in the room, and Mr. Thompson, with eyes barely cracked open, watched everything with bated breath. Daniel bent down slightly, his eyes fixed on the glittering wristwatch. It wasn't just a watch. It was a piece of art. The gold band shone with brilliance, and the tiny diamonds around its face sparkled like stars. The boy reached out carefully, his fingers hovering above it. Mr. Thompson's chest tightened. This is it, he thought. He's going to take it. But to his surprise, Daniel did something else. With both hands, He picked up a watch gently, examining it with the kind of care a child gives to a fragile toy. Then, after a moment, he whispered softly, "It could break if it falls." He carefully placed it back on the table, making sure it sat neatly where it had been before. The billionaire's eyebrows twitched slightly. He hadn't expected that. Daniel's eyes then shifted to the bundles of money, to a boy who had seen his mother work tirelessly for every single dollar. The sight was almost unbelievable. Hundreds of bills stacked so casually, like they meant nothing at all. He stretched out his hand, lightly brushing the edge of one stack with his fingertips. He didn't pocket it. He didn't even pick it up fully. Instead, noticing that one bundle was slightly tilted, Daniel straightened it carefully. He aligned the stacks so that none would slide off and fall to the floor. His small hands patted them gently into place, as though he was protecting them. Mr. Thompson's mind spun. Why isn't he taking anything? He wondered. Any other child would have slipped one bill into their pocket without hesitation. But this boy, he's tidying it? Daniel stepped back, still staring at the table. His expression was thoughtful, almost troubled. He stood there for a while, fidgeting with his fingers, as though something inside him was wrestling for attention. Then, slowly, he reached into his own pocket. Mr. Thompson narrowed his eyes ever so slightly. The boy pulled out something small and crumpled. It was a single worn dollar bill. The edges were torn, and the ink had faded from years of passing through many hands. For Daniel, it was a precious piece of money, perhaps the only one he carried. He placed it gently on the table, right beside the billionaire's riches. Leaning closer, he whispered, almost as though speaking to himself, "Mama says we should always give before we receive. Maybe one day, God will bless us too." Mr. Thompson froze. His entire body went rigid as those words sank deep into him. Here was a boy who had nothing, no toys, no luxuries, no comforts, and yet, instead of taking, he was giving. Instead of stealing from a wealthy man, he was offering the little he had, as if it could balance the mountain of riches already present. The billionaire's chest tightened painfully. He had expected dishonesty. He had expected greed. But what he saw instead was purity, generosity, and value so deeply rooted that they made his own wealth feel hollow. As Daniel stepped back quietly, preparing to return to his room, Mr. Thompson knew his world had just shifted. Mr. Thompson had spent his entire life building walls of doubt around his heart. He trusted contracts, lawyers, and bank vaults, but never people. That night, when he set up his little trap with the gold watch, stacks of money, and the diamond-studded pen, he was certain of one thing. The boy would fail. Children were curious. Even the best-raised child, he thought, would be tempted by such treasures. If not by greed, then at least by playful mischief. But as he lay there pretending to sleep, watching Daniel's every move through half-closed eyes, he saw something that left him stunned. The boy hadn't grabbed the money. He hadn't tried to pocket the watch. Instead, he had straightened the piles of cash, carefully placed the watch back where it belonged, and touched nothing for himself. That alone was enough to make the billionaire raise an eyebrow. But what happened next pierced through his heart in a way he never thought possible. Daniel had reached into his pocket and pulled out that single, wrinkled dollar bill, the only money he owned. He placed it gently on the table, whispering words so soft that they might have been lost under the ticking of the clock. But Mr. Thompson heard them clearly. "Mama says we should always give before we receive. Maybe one day, God will bless us too." The billionaire's breath caught in his throat. His mind, usually so quick to judge, went completely blank. For a man who had spent his life surrounded by people chasing his fortune, it was almost impossible to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Here was a boy, a child with almost nothing, offering up the little he had, not to earn a reward, not to seek attention, but because his mother had taught him that giving was greater than taking. Mr. Thompson felt something stir in his chest. He had spent decades believing money was the ultimate test of character. But this boy had just shattered that belief with one simple, selfless act. For a moment, he wondered if he had heard wrong. He questioned whether Daniel had misunderstood what was in front of him. But no, the sincerity in the boy's voice was undeniable. Daniel didn't linger over his gift. He didn't wait to see if anyone had noticed. After placing the dollar on the table, He stood silently, his small shoulders rising and falling with a sigh. His eyes lingered on the treasures for one last moment, not with envy, but almost with quiet admiration, before he turned to leave. The billionaire's heart raced. He wanted to sit up to ask the boy why he had done it, but something inside him told him to wait. He needed to let this moment settle in his own mind first. Memories began to surface. Mr. Thompson remembered his own childhood, something he rarely thought about. He had grown up in a poor neighborhood himself, long before the billions and the mansions. He remembered the hunger, the torn shoes, the nights his parents had gone to bed without food just so he could eat. But instead of holding on to gratitude, he had allowed success to harden him. Somewhere along the line, he had decided that wealth was the only measure of worth. Now, seeing this boy, he felt ashamed. Daniel had less than he ever did as a child. Yet he carried more honesty, generosity, and strength of character than most adults Mr. Thompson knew. The billionaire studied the wrinkled dollar bill on the table. To anyone else, it was worthless. To him, it suddenly felt priceless. That small piece of paper represented sacrifice, hope, and faith, things that had been missing from his life for a very long time. As Daniel began to walk away, the billionaire felt his chest tighten again. A wave of emotions he couldn't control washed over him. Regret for his suspicion, awe at the boy's heart, and a strange, humbling sense of gratitude. He realized something profound in that moment. True wealth wasn't measured in gold or dollar bills. It wasn't the cars parked outside, the art on his walls, or the jewels on his wrist. True wealth was in values, in character, in the ability to give even when you had nothing. And here was an 11-year-old boy teaching him that lesson. For years, Mr. Thompson had surrounded himself with people who wanted to take. Business partners who schemed for bigger shares. Employees who pretended to flatter him but whispered complaints behind his back. Acquaintances who only stayed close because of his influence. He had tested many people before, and nearly every time they had failed. But this time it was different. This wasn't a grown man with ambition. This was an adult who had learned how to mask greed with fake politeness. This was just a boy, a child who had been raised to believe that honesty was worth more than diamonds. The billionaire's throat felt dry. He swallowed hard, still frozen in his spot on the sofa. He could feel the sting of tears forming in his eyes, but he forced them back. He wasn't ready to reveal himself yet. Not until he fully understood the weight of what had just happened. Daniel reached the doorway and paused for a moment, glancing back at the sleeping figure of Mr. Thompson. His eyes were gentle, almost protective, as though he was making sure the man was safe. Then, quietly, he turned and walked back down the hallway, disappearing into the shadows. The billionaire remained still, staring at the crumpled dollar on the table. He had thought this test would confirm his worst belief, that even a child could not resist temptation. Instead, it had opened his eyes to a truth he had long forgotten. Goodness existed, pure and unshaken, even in the humblest of hearts. For the first time in many years, Mr. Thompson felt small in his own mansion. All the wealth around him seemed meaningless compared to the richness of that single act of generosity. And though he had planned this night as a test of the boy, it was beginning to feel like the test had really been for him. The moment hung heavy in the grand living room. For what felt like hours, Mr. Thompson sat frozen on the leather sofa, pretending to be asleep, though his chest was pounding with the weight of what he had just seen. The crumpled dollar bill on the glass table seemed to shine brighter than the stacks of cash, the golden wristwatch, or even the diamond-studded pen beside it. He had expected to expose dishonesty. Instead, the boy had exposed him, his pride, his cynicism, and his broken way of looking at the world. Finally, Mr. Thompson could take it no longer. Slowly, he opened his eyes fully and sat up. His movements startled Daniel, who had just reached the doorway to leave. The boy froze, his small shoulders stiffening as he turned around. His eyes went wide, and in them Mr. Thompson saw fear. The billionaire cleared his throat, his voice coming out rough and sharp. "What are you doing here, boy?" Daniel's lips trembled. He hadn't expected to be caught. To him, it looked as though he had been sneaking around the billionaire's wealth while he slept. His young voice shook as he tried to explain. I saw your things, sir. I didn't want them to fall. or break. I wanted to make sure everything was safe. He pointed nervously to the stacks of money, which now sat neatly arranged, and the wristwatch, placed carefully in its original spot. Then his small hand moved toward the wrinkled dollar bill he had left behind. And I wanted to give this. Mama says we should always give before we receive. Maybe one day God will bless us too. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of lessons his mother had given him. He stood there trembling, expecting anger, maybe even punishment. But what happened next shook him more than anything. Mr. Thompson didn't yell. He didn't accuse. Instead, the stern, untouchable billionaire lowered his head and pressed his fingers against his eyes. When he lifted his face again, his eyes glistened with tears. For years, nobody had seen him cry. Not his business partners, not his staff, not even distant relatives. Yet here he was, his voice breaking as he whispered, You gave me your only $1? Daniel nodded slowly, unsure whether he had done something wrong. At that moment, a hurried voice came echoing from the hallway. Daniel. It was Angela, his mother. She had been awake, uneasy in a stranger's mansion. Hearing voices from the living room, she rushed in, her heart thundering with fear. When she saw her son standing nervously by the table, with the billionaire watching him, her breath caught. Sir, I am so sorry, she blurted out, rushing forward and placing her hands on Daniel's shoulders. If he touched anything, I swear it wasn't his intention. Please forgive him. He's just a child. She pulled Daniel close, ready to take responsibility, ready to protect her son from whatever punishment might come. But instead of scolding, Mr. Thompson stood up slowly. His tall figure loomed, but his expression was unlike anything Angela had seen before. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were soft, even wet with emotion. Angela, he said, his voice heavy, your son has just taught me something no business deal, no fortune, no success ever could. Angela blinked in confusion. She looked at the table, at the untouched riches, and the single crumpled dollar bill, then back at her employer. I don't understand. Mr. Thompson stepped closer, resting a gentle hand on Daniel's small shoulder. He looked at the boy as though seeing him for the first time, not just as a Maid's son, not just as a child in his house, but as someone far greater than that. I tested him. The billionaire admitted, I doubted him. I doubted you. I thought, perhaps you both would be like everyone else I've known, hungry for what isn't theirs. So I placed my wealth before him and pretended to sleep. Angela's eyes widened in shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. But instead of taking, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice cracking, your boy gave. He gave me the only thing he had. Tell me, Angela, what kind of child is that? Angela's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed Daniel's shoulders tightly. A child who knows honesty, sir. A child who's been taught that no matter how little you have, you never take what isn't yours. Daniel looked up at his mother, then back at the billionaire. His small voice whispered, Mama always says God watches everything we do. Those words broke whatever was left of Mr. Thompson's pride. The tears he'd been holding back slipped down his cheeks. For the first time in decades, he didn't care if anyone saw. He crouched down so he was eye level with Daniel. His voice shook as he said, Daniel, you show me that true riches don't sit in vaults or banks. They live here. He pressed a trembling hand against the boy's chest, right over his heart. And you, son, are richer than I'll ever be. Angela's tears now streamed freely. Never in her years working for this man had she imagined seeing him this vulnerable, this human. She had always known him as distant, powerful, and cold. But tonight, because of her son's simple act, she was seeing a side of him no one else had ever seen. Mr. Thompson stood again, straightened his shoulders, and took a deep breath. His voice was steadier now, but softer than it had ever been. No more apologies, Angela, he said firmly. Your son has nothing to be forgiven for. In fact, I owe him more than I can ever repay. Angela wiped her tears quickly, unsure what he meant. Daniel, still holding on to his mother's hand, looked up at the billionaire with wide eyes, innocence and confusion written all over his face. And in that quiet, rain-soaked night, the truth stood clear in the heart of the mansion. The test meant to expose greed had revealed something far more powerful: honesty, humility, and the kind of character money could never buy. The storm outside continued to rumble, but inside the mansion, something far greater was unfolding. A billionaire's heart, once hardened by greed, suspicion, and pride, was softening before the quiet honesty of a boy who had almost nothing to his name. Mr. Thompson stood tall, yet he felt smaller than ever in the presence of Daniel and his mother. The grand chandelier above, the polished floors beneath his feet, the endless wealth scattered across the room. None of it seemed to matter anymore. All that mattered was the wrinkled dollar bill lying humbly on the glass table. It was more than just a piece of paper. To Mr. Thompson, it had become a symbol of something priceless: integrity, sacrifice, and a reminder that even in poverty, one could be richer than the wealthiest man alive. Angela still held her son protectively, as though expecting the moment to turn sour. But the billionaire's voice broke the silence with a warmth she had never heard before. "Angela," he said, turned to face her, "I've made mistakes. I thought money defined everything. I thought loyalty could be bought, and honesty was a fairy tale. But tonight, your son proved me wrong." Angela's eyes softened, though they still brimmed with uncertainty. She had spent years working under this man, never once expecting him to see her or her child as anything more than servants. Yet here he was, speaking not as a master wealth, but as a humble human being. Mr. Thompson crouched again, bringing himself down to Daniel's level. He placed both hands gently on the boy's shoulders. "Daniel, I tested you. I wanted to see if you would take what was not yours. Instead, you gave me something no amount of money could ever buy: your trust, your honesty, your heart." The boy swallowed nervously, still unsure he was in trouble. Did I do something wrong, sir?" "No, son," the billionaire said, his voice breaking. "You did everything right. You gave when you had nothing to give. And because of that, I will never see the world the same way again." Angela wiped her tears quickly, her voice trembling as she asked, "But what does this mean, sir?" Mr. Thompson rose to his full height, his decision already made. For decades, he had used his fortune only to grow more fortune, but tonight he knew that wealth had to serve a greater purpose. "It means," he said firmly, "that from this day forward, your son will never have to worry about his future. I will sponsor his education fully, every book, every uniform, every opportunity. He will have a chance to chase his dreams without the shadow of poverty holding him back." Angela gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Sir, that's too much. We can never repay you." But the billionaire stopped her with a shake of his head. "You've already repaid me 100 times over. Tonight, your son gave me back something I lost a long time ago: faith in people. That is worth more than all the money in this house." Daniel's eyes lit up, though he still looked to his mother for reassurance. She knelt beside him, tears streaming freely now, and whispered, "See, Daniel, God really does bless those who give." The boy smiled shyly, and for the first time, Mr. Thompson returned that smile, genuine, unforced, and filled with humility. But the changes didn't stop there. The billionaire turned back to Angela. "As for you, you are no longer just my maid. You have been more loyal, more honest, and more valuable to this household than most people I've ever trusted. From now on, you will manage this estate, not as a servant, but as a respected head of staff. You've earned it." Angela's knees nearly buckled. She had never asked for promotion, never dreamed of such recognition. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Mr. Thompson replied softly. "Just continue being the remarkable woman and mother you already are." The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. The storm outside seemed to quiet, as though nature itself was acknowledging the shift in the billionaire's heart. From that night on, things were never the same. The next morning, the mansion buzzed with whispers among the staff. They had all noticed something different in their employer: an unfamiliar softness in his tone, a lightness in his step. Word quickly spread of how young Daniel had passed a test no one else ever could. True to his word, Mr. Thompson arranged for Daniel's education at the finest schools, providing him with opportunities that had once been unimaginable. He ensured the boy had mentors, books, and the tools to shape a future brighter than either he or his mother could have dreamed. Angela, too, found herself stepping into her new role, no longer cleaning floors or scrubbing dishes. She now oversaw the running of the entire estate. The respect in her colleagues' eyes filled her heart with gratitude, but it was a look of pride on her son's face that mattered most. As for Mr. Thompson, the lesson stayed with him forever. Whenever business partners tried to sway him with greed, he remembered the sight of a boy placing his last dollar on the table. Whenever he was tempted to close his heart again, he recalled the whisper, "Mama says we should always give before we receive." The billionaire began to change not just within his home, but in the world beyond it. He donated generously to charities, funded schools in poor neighborhoods, and created opportunities for children like Daniel. But more importantly, he really listened to the people around him. For the first time in his life, he understood that his fortune was not meant to keep people at a distance, but to bring people closer, to heal, to uplift. And though the world continued to see him as a billionaire, in his own eyes, he was something else entirely, a man who had been blessed by the honesty of a child. Years later, when Daniel had grown tall and strong, he would often visit Mr. Thompson's study, and there, framed on the wall, was not a painting, not a stock certificate, not even a gold watch. It was a single, wrinkled dollar bill, the same one Daniel had laid down on that rainy night. To anyone else, it was worthless. But to Mr. Thompson, it was the most valuable possession he ever owned, a reminder that the richest heart sometimes beats inside the humblest soul. And so, what began as a test of greed ended as the beginning of a new family bond, one built not on wealth, but on honesty, trust, and love.